scientists who study birds, say that the Archaeopteryx was a bird based on the wings, based on the existence of the wings, based on the fact that it had feathers. And they can look at the imprint and say that the wings and the feathers of the Archaeopteryx was just like modern birds. They had the flight feathers that would allow it to fly a long way. If you've ever been to a zoo or some other place like that that has shows with live birds in them, a lot of times the workers there will clip the flight feathers so that they can allow the birds to fly, but they can't fly very far. And that way they don't have to keep them on a cable or a string or whatever. So these paleoornithologists, that is, people who study old birds, fossil cats of birds, the evolution of birds, they say that these imprints of the birds show that the Archaeopteryx could fly. It had all of the structures it needed to fly, even long distances. They say that it was an accomplished flyer. But just like the bicycle over here, you've got the grips on the brake. You've got the cable that runs down to the brakes on the tire. You've got all of the screws or the bolts or the nuts or whatever. A brake is not just a brake. It is a whole system that has to be in place in order for the brake to work in the first place. Just having a handle, the thing you grasp on the handle, doesn't mean the brake's going to work. Well, just because this animal has wings, doesn't mean those wings popped up out of nowhere. Where did the wings come from? Where did they originate? I'll talk more about that in just a moment, but the bird obviously also has to have a strong sternum, has the wishbone that the muscles and the ligaments attach to, so that the bird can move its wings, to have lift, where it can soar. The wings did not appear out of nowhere. But then scientists also look at the dinosaur and say, well, maybe it was a reptile. And there are some parts of the Archaeopteryx that make you think of a reptile. It's got teeth. You can see a little bit from this close-up. It's got teeth, it's got fingers on its claws, on its wing, at the tip of its wing, as if it were fingers. And it has a long spiny tail that makes you think more of a lizard than of modern birds. And so the original evolutionists look at the Archaeopteryx and say, okay, it's got parts of the bird, and it's got parts of reptiles. Therefore, it's a transitional species. It was on its way from turning from a dinosaur into a bird. And again, you look at the textbooks, biology textbooks, even books written for middle school students, and they're going to say, there you have it. And if this is a transitional species, then obviously evolution is true. And if evolution is true, the Bible is not true. It's okay if you want to live by it according to your morals and so forth, but as far as telling us where the world came from, it's not true. But is that what we learn from the Archaeopteryx? You see, the deal is, even evolutionists are not agreed on the Archaeopteryx. As late as 2007, which was what, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 2007, scientists were arguing in a journal, Science magazine, over whether or not birds descended from dinosaurs or from some other animal. They're still arguing even today over whether or not Archaeopteryx is a transitional fossil. Now, they're not going to let you know that. Because if they let the general public know that they're still arguing about it, then there goes their evidence for evolution. But when they're talking among themselves, they're very open and honest about the fact that they do not know. Now, when I talk to the little kids, I told them about the categories of reptiles and the categories of birds. And you and I have known that for decades. But just because we say that reptiles have teeth, for example, not all reptiles have teeth. Turtles don't have teeth. And we generally say, well, amphibians don't have teeth. But there are some amphibians that do. And my point is, just because man comes along and creates these categories, and the category system system was actually started by a man who believed in the Bible, Carlos Linnaeus. He categorized animals because he thought that they showed God's order and design in creating the universe. Carlos Linnaeus lived about 100 years or so before Charles Darwin came along. So just because man comes up with these categories does not mean that they're fail-proof. Let me give you another example. Some of our kids watch platypus, Perry the Platypus on TV. Phineas the First. I love that cartoon. The platypus. What are you going to do with platypus? This is one of those that stumps evolutionists. What are you going to do with the platypus? Well, they said, let's just create a special category for the platypus. It's not a transitional species, despite the fact that it's got a fur like a mammal and a bill like a duck. It's not halfway between a bird and a mammal. We just put it over there by itself. Because they don't know what to do with it. Could it not be that the Archaeopteryx is the same thing? There is, in fact, a bird today, a modern bird today, living in South America called the hoatzin. It has claws at the end of its wings. A modern bird. And in fact, if you look at all of the characteristics of the Archaeopteryx that evolutionists say are actually reptile-like, there's a modern bird somewhere that has the same features. Maybe not all modern birds have all the features that the Archaeopteryx has. But there's modern birds that have all the features that the Archaeopteryx has. Now, here's another question that you could pose the evolutionists that will get them stirred up. Where did the ability to fly come from in the first place? Well, some of them say it started from animals jumping from trees to trees. That is the trees down theory. Well, if you just think for a moment, in order for an animal like a monkey, for example, in order for a mammal to jump from one tree to another, it's got to have toes on the hind legs that can grab a hold of branches, and it's got to have front legs that can grab a hold of branches. Could you imagine a two-legged animal jumping from tree to tree without hands that can grab a hold of something? Not only that, generally speaking, they also have a tail to help them balance when they jump. Well, where are you going to go from a four-legged animal to an animal that has only two legs, and the front two are wings? Now, evolutionists will say, well, it happened. You just have to give it enough time. That's why they have to believe in millions of years. I don't believe that for a second. But you have to have millions of years for these small changes to accumulate. How are you going to get from a skateboard to a bicycle? Where are the braking systems going to come from? Where's the gear system going to come from? Where's the seat going to come from? Where are the feathers going to come from? Where's the sternum going to come from? Where's the wishbone? You see, what we need is for an animal to have a half-formed wishbone. What we need is for an animal to have something on the outside that is halfway between scales and halfway feathers. That would be a transitional species. Not something that's fully formed with everything it needs to function. That's like saying, where did bicycle come from in the first place? Well, the other theory about where birds came from, since we can't have a bird coming from a four-legged animal, well then they say, well, the bird came from a two-legged animal. And it was running along the ground, trying to catch its prey. And it kept jumping, and kept jumping, and kept jumping, see, until eventually the front wing arms turned into wings. Well, if you weren't in a biology class at UK, you'd say, well, that's a fable. You're sitting in biology class at UK, that's science. That's not science. That's idiocy. How could you go from an animal with two legs running along with little hands to a bird fully formed, able to fly, with everything designed the way it's supposed to be? And in fact, the last point, look at what would have to happen in order for you to go from a reptile to a bird. You see, the wings on the bird is just the most obvious difference between a bird and a reptile. But again, you've got a whole system that has to exist and be in place in order for the bird to fly. Obviously, the development of feathers. You've got to change the respiratory of a reptile and the heart of a bird are designed differently. You've got to have a respiratory system that's different. You've got to reform the skeletal system. You and I would not be able to fly for no other reason than our skeletons together. Birds' bones are designed differently. The digestive system has to be designed differently. When you say somebody eats like a bird, really what that would mean is that they eat a lot all day long. Because birds can't have a full stomach like you and I get about 1 o'clock this afternoon and then be able to fly. Their digestive system has to operate differently. Nervous system, obviously, you've got to have nerves that can control the wings. Development in their brain, their eyes, how their eyes work, feels and beats, so forth. Obviously, constructing nests would be different, as well as the ability to fly and to find their way home. Birds are complex creatures. They could not have come about by accident. And so what this means is, the bottom line is, the Archaeopteryx is a bird. It's an ancient bird that no longer exists, yes. But it's a bird, nevertheless. My biology textbook on the origin of flight says that the origin of birds is highly speculative. And yet they wanted to use the Archaeopteryx as an example of the transition. They say it's speculative. They don't know. They don't know where flight originated. And then finally, in a letter to a brother in Christ who spends his time teaching about creation and evolution, probably the foremost expert on bird evolution living today. He's retired from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Alan Paduccia is his name. He wrote Brother Harold a letter, and he said that Archaeopteryx was clearly a well-developed bird with true feathers. So you see, it's not a transition. Even though it's used to teach our children that the Bible is wrong, the experts say, no, actually, the Archaeopteryx